There is certainly, I think, I think cost language is interesting. You can use the language of sacrifice in its place, but there is a sense in which, speaking from a distinctly Christian vantage point, the particular resources that I think are there to draw on, you know, the Christian worldview, or one iteration of the Christian worldview, has at its heart a particular anthropology, particular understanding of human beings. There's language lit all throughout Scripture, but one that is always striking to me is this idea that the Apostle Paul raises in one of his letters to the church at Corinth, that we are all seeing through a glass dimly. In that context, he's talking about spiritual gifts, talking about spiritual revelation, but I think we can import it into this discussion that we all have a limited vantage point in view, that we're all broken and frail, fallen, trying to get it right. And in that sense, you know, it's in many ways a more robust version of nobody's perfect, right? So then how does that motivate me to engage with someone? I often say, even if you're talking to an interlocutor and there is no way that you could ever be brought to the conviction that they are right about a thing. I mean, it might be true. It's true for me as it relates to certain vantage points or ideas. I at least, though, I'm called to, I think, accept the fact that in the dialogical exchange, or in me confronting a particular idea, concept, etc., that in that confrontation, in that exchange, that moment can at least help me to be less wrong, right? If I'm convinced I'm right, I can at least be more right. Something to learn from the other, a particular idea, a particular exchange, experience, because of the fact that we are all seeing through a glass dimly. We are all viewing things from a limited perspective, vantage point, etc. Our own positionality, our context, all these things are informing background, informing how we come to a situation, come to an idea. And then the other thing I'd add, and then I'll leave it at this, is there is this sense, and you see this all throughout Scripture as well. A point that comes to mind is a letter to the church at Philippi, talking about the fact that part of the benefit of a particular perspective that Christian worldview is trying to bring is that it gives you the resources to be less self-interested, that I can actually sacrifice my own self-interest in a particular exchange or moment, et cetera, for the sake of putting that on a valuation on the other. Very difficult to do depending on what you're talking about. And in many ways, I might understand why someone wouldn't do that, depending on an idea exchange that they're having. But there are, again, to use your language, Nate, these resources where I am kind of freed up because of a particular vantage point and orientation that I have toward the divine and towards other people, that I can actually cost and sacrifice, to go back to your language. I can put your interest above my own, perhaps sometimes. Again, there are exceptions, complexities, but I have the resources to do that. That again affords me the opportunity to be charitable, and the opportunity to bear on myself those costs that might accrue because of that act of charity. But I think it begins with a place of humility. That there's always something that I could potentially learn, even if it's what not to do, from engaging the other experience and how they walk through the world.
You know, I've been intrigued by some of the arguments that have been used across the country with some of this anti-history legislation or cancel culture legislation. And one of the arguments is we don't want students to feel uncomfortable in class. And I have sympathy for that. I mean, I think that it's a hard thing when you feel uncomfortable in class. And that may be one of the costs of intellectual charity, that to really be open to giving, assuming best intentions, a generous read, that's going to be discomforting because you're not being reinforced with your own view necessarily. And I think one of the things that's happened as a consequence of social media, as a consequence of people living close to people with similar political views, is we're kind of marinating in a stew of ideological sameness. So we lose the muscle to hear things that are different than what we believe. And so what we lose is we're not being affirmed. As if there's kind of a right to being affirmed. And I think that's why I think intellectual charity, I don't think it's ever been easy, but I think it's really difficult now because we're asking, especially to come back to a classroom context, we're asking students and we're asking instructors, professors, and teachers to do something that is the antithesis of what is the norm in the world outside of school, which I would argue makes it even more important to do. Yeah. But I do think it causes genuine discomfort. And so then we have to wrestle with the question of, are there times when discomfort is actually really important, that you need discomfort to learn? And what are the limits of discomfort? And it comes back to, I think, who's in power and who's not. It's very easy for people who are in the majority in any situation to say, well, it's important to feel uncomfortable. You're going to learn a lot from it. If you're, in a classroom and you're one of 2 or 3 students of the same racial or ethnicity in that classroom, then, that feeling, that discomfort, I think, is different. So I don't think we should imagine that all these situations are same. It's much easier. The sacrifice for intellectual charity should be disproportionately borne by people with power.
Nate, I think that you're right, that there are costs. And my response would be that education, like many of the good things in life, costs. There is a real cost. And very often, it comes with education. It's not costless. It's not without discomfort. It's not without being impelled to reconsider things that you have taken for granted. All of those things, can really be disconcerting, maybe even discombobulating, but that's what education, real education, entails.